of the engagement, the same storm, different boats, uh, was helpful and people are using it. And then, of course, most of all, the way we learn best is when we're connecting with others. And so the breakout sessions, folks found very helpful. Needs and requests. More time to process some of the materials and content that was being presented. Many of you were here with your school teams or district teams or organizational teams and felt that it would be really helpful if there was an opportunity for you to meet with your teams. And then when you were in partners, the opportunity to change partners more frequently. So we've taken those needs and requests to heart, and we are having you have the opportunity to have more time with your teams, and you're going to be with your team most of the whole morning. If you're here by yourself, through the magic of the Zoom random number generator, you will be with the team as well. So you'll also have some time to work on your own. Sometimes we forget that our first conversation and our first learning is really with what goes on inside of our own head and our own space. The work that we did on day one is sort of a balcony view, was foundational around all the learning that's for adults and students, involves both social and emotional skills. There's some common misunderstandings of SEL that we brought into the room. And then when you're thinking about systemic SEL, it really begins with ourselves and an examination of our own SEL skills and competencies. And we looked at some tools and resources, particularly from CASEL. Today, it's reopening the dance floor. It's around engaging with adults, not just adults who are in our schools or districts, but education environment has really changed. And so it's our families, it's our community partners. And then how does SEL, what is the role it plays in reopening schools in 2020? We know it's not a panacea, but it certainly offers us a foundation to ground the work for reopening schools. And we're learning that it's an essential part of this environment. And then practical tools and applications, specifically CASEL's roadmap for reopening schools. We're going to have an opportunity to take a look at that and do some work with our teams with the roadmap and some of the tools that are there. The flow of today is we're going to have our warm welcome. We're going to look at conceptually what we're talking about when we talk about adult SEL. What are we talking about? We're going to use a CASEL framework for that. We're going to look at the first critical practice in CASEL's roadmap, which is around partnerships. The partnerships that we have to have with our students, with our families, with our community members, our districts, our counties, because we need all the help we can get in this reopening 2020. And then we'll have a short break, a stretch break, and come back and look at how do we really take care of the adults that are in our staff, that are in our most direct community. We're adding time at the end of the formal presentation for questions and answers, conversations in the main room, and then also opening up breakout rooms that you can continue to meet with your teams as we go. Let's see. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone.
Whoops.
So very briefly, wanted to review some of our logistics for today and a reminder about grace and the imperfections of doing this kind of workshop over Zoom. Just this morning, I actually lost power at about 7 o'clock when I was preparing for this today because of the rolling blackouts around the state. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that isn't going to happen to anybody else in the middle of this. But just a reminder that for your camera, off for self and on for community. So we know that folks need to take a break. Feel free to turn your camera off if you need a break from being on screen. If you could go in and next to your name, also include your organization. At the bottom with the icons, if you know how to do that, if you could do that, that really helps us identify where people are coming from. The chat is to be used if you have immediate questions you need addressed or some kind of an issue around the technology that we can easily respond to through the chat. In the breakouts, a reminder about equity of voice, that it's really important to make sure that you leave time for everybody to speak within the time that we've allotted for the breakouts, and those will primarily be in trios today. We're also going to be using a Google Doc again, and you'll find that in the chat, and a reminder that the Google Doc is a document that everybody can see, so keep that in mind when you are taking your moments to be writing reflections inside of the Google Doc. And then all of the resources, once again, will be shared. Some of it is available to download right away, and we'll also be sending another email at the end of the session with all of the materials for you to be able to bring back to your organizations. So, instead of traditional agreements or ground rules that we sometimes go over at the beginning of these sessions, we're instead using this art of conversation behaviors that comes from the National Equity Project. And Mary shared with me that she recently did a facilitation training with the National Equity Project, which she said was really excellent and really recommends. And so we wanted to share these with you as some, not ground rules, but really some things to keep in mind as we're going through this together today. We acknowledge one another as equals. We stay curious about each other. We recognize that we each need each other's help to become better listeners. We slow down so we have time to think and reflect. We remember that conversation is a natural way that humans think together, and we expect it to be messy at times. So I think these are really, really useful things for us to keep in mind as we go through today, and also we go through this work moving forward. So this is a quote that we really love to help set the stage for our work together today, which is going to be focused on adult social and emotional learning that we wanted to share before we jump into more of the content. It's possible to prepare for the future without knowing what it will be. The primary way to prepare for the unknown is to attend to the quality of our relationships, to how well we know and trust one another. So as we go through, you will see how much this applies to what we're going to be talking about with adult social emotional learning and the importance of our relationships with one another to all of the work.
And we're going to have an opportunity now for you to think about how this quote impacts and shows up in your own context. And we'll have a few minutes to share in your teams this quote's relevance to your own work now. So Robert, Melissa, I'm looking for your magic. And Robert, can you send folks a banner at about 2 minutes? I'm curious what came up for folks in the discussion around How do you prepare for the future without knowing what it'll be? And what is this attending to the quality of the relationships as it impacts our work? So if folks take a minute to either type into chat or speak out in the main room, what came up for folks in their trios around this quote? Any comments about, did it seem relevant? Was it on the mark or not?
I like this one from Michelle Santiago. Everyone is stressed. Have to be cognizant of emotions and having empathy.
Mhm.
Building relationships to build our support system. Amy, we're happy that you're here from Encinitas. We're living this right now. We started school yesterday with the reality
Yes.
that our future keeps changing with
Yes.
every new protocol. The foundation of relationships we have is helping our teams lean forward.
Focusing on connection and flexibility.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm taking all of those to heart in my own work as well. That we really, it's so amazing in school. We plan a year out, and in this situation, we're planning, changing, planning, changing, planning, changing, and those relationships really do matter to us immensely. And that piece at the end around how well we know and trust one another, and that piece about trust is so critical. There's the Stephen Covey quote that change moves at the speed of trust. So I invite us to think a minute about what is it that contributes to building trusting relationships. Think in your own world of a relationship with someone that you really, really trust. What is it that helps create and build that trusting relationship? And in chat, there's a link, Melissa, to a doc where we can put our one word in that contributes to building trusting relationships. So not using chat this time, but using the link that's in chat to add to our understanding of what it takes to build trust. And Melissa, do I stop share and hand over to you, or? And as these are popping up and we're looking at them and we're seeing our own word in there, I want us to also think about what are the adult social and emotional learning skills that we call on in ourselves around vulnerability, around honesty, around authenticity. So in order to be in these trusting relationships, what are the SEL skills that we need to bring forward to engage with one another? Okay. Also think about what are the challenges we have in our spaces that prevents us from being honest, from being vulnerable, from being authentic. What gets in the way of our ability to build these trusting relationships? And we'll keep this, Melissa, right? This will be in our piece. So we're going to go back to the
there you go.
thank you so much, team. So this is the quality of a trusting relationship with these folks. So I really appreciate this very much, you all. And apologies to everyone. But so thinking about just that moment around what constitutes adult social emotional learning. And in Castle's work, we've discovered that the first piece of adult SEL is around learning about our own competencies and developing the capacity to support SEL in our peers and students. So thinking about our last time together where we did our SEL self-assessment and we looked at those skills and in ourselves, really, our self-reflection. The next element in adult SEL is around collaboration. And this really speaks to often what happens in education is we just put people in a room together and we expect them to be able to collaborate. So this is about really attending to collaboration and the quality of the structures that we set in place and the conditions for collaboration. So not just making an assumption that because someone's on a team that they're collaborating. And we've all been in situations where we've experienced that. So this is attending to the details of collaboration. And then finally, around modeling. And we've seen this continually where you'll be in a meeting where someone's modeling the 3 signature practices, and the minute they step out of the room, they start yelling at a colleague about a perceived offense. So it's this idea that we're always engaged in social emotional learning, whether we're in meetings, whether we're in hallways, and how do we learn how to attend to that practice as part of our daily lives, not just during a second step or caring school community or a restorative practice moment, but just throughout our whole days and times together. So it's learning about self, collaborating, and modeling. And the next invitation is to think about this coming year for you in your own practice. What is one area that you would like to focus on in terms of your own adult social emotional learning in your team or in your school? Is it focusing on learning more about self and assessing self and developing capacity? Is it focusing on what are the elements and strategies that will build a rich and productive collaboration? Or is it how do we learn how to model this work in our day-to-day routines, both in and out of classrooms and offices? So think a moment about which one of these you would like to focus on and why. Why did you select it? Where do you see it as leveraging change? And why does it matter in terms of reopening schools and setting up adults to be in trusting relationships with one another? So think a moment, and we'll be having times in, and I'm not sure, Robert, whether we'll be in trios or in our teams here for this sharing.
Well, by that time, we should be able to do this in our team.
Okay. So we're going to take a moment then to select one, think about why it matters, and share it in our breakout. We'll have about just a short couple of minutes for this. And hand it over to Jennifer for a new way of taking a break.
So this is a screen break, and you will see this multiple times during our session today. And I believe this also came from the National Equity Project facilitation training. And it's along the theme that we're going to be talking about on and off today, about the importance of pausing and reflecting and really reminding ourselves about the importance of self-awareness and how we are showing up. And screen breaks are an important way to pause, especially these days. So this exercise is something you can bring back. And it's basically that every 20 minutes, you should take a screen break and look 20 feet away from your screen for 20 seconds as a way to just regroup and breathe for a few moments. So if you could go ahead and do that, look 20 feet away from your screen for about 20 seconds, and then we'll bring you back. Great.
Thank you. I really appreciated that very much. We've been referring to this throughout the 2 days of Castle's roadmap for reopening schools. And in Castle, we began thinking about this in March, actually. And as we were working with our 20 core districts, we were trying to finish up the school year, and people were already jumping ahead and worried and concerned about this whole piece about reopening. And would they be able to, how would they be able to use equity-focused SEL strategies in the midst of such uncertainty and chaotic times? And while we were engaged in this roadmap, the George Floyd was murdered, and the nation shifted to a focus on equity and anti-racist work with great intensity in terms of uprisings throughout the country. And so the reopening schools roadmap also reflects what's happening in the country, not only with COVID, but also with racial equity, and also the economic hardships and crisis that we're in. So in the midst of this, we've seen how the focus of the whole country is on reopening schools. So this is a guide, a roadmap for really how to think about and engage with the whole process of reopening, that's based on the existing strengths that we know are already there in our school communities. And 40 different organizations came together over this summer to work on this roadmap. So it doesn't just reflect Castle, it also reflects many, many partners that we've worked with. It's structured around 4 critical practices that we're going to engage with. 2 of them. The first 2 are really around adult social emotional learning. The third one is around students. And finally, the fourth one is, how do we know we're really making a difference? What are our indicators that we're at all in the right track? Each activity, we come into this work with essential questions And those questions we're continually asking ourselves, and it helps us to focus our thinking and focus our work. No matter where you are in the reopening process, you could be still in planning stages, you could be in the midst of preparing, maybe you're already implementing. Many schools in California have already reopened. And then also sustaining. So there's a whole continuum of resources and ways of thinking and engaging in the reopening process that really is going to have iterations throughout the year. We recommend always starting with critical practice 1, and we will have a deeper dive into that this morning. Critical practice 1 is really around how school has changed. We're now in relationships and partnerships with families and our students in a way that we really have never been before. And the traditional ways of back to school night, this kinds of things, the classroom is often the student's home or kitchen table, and or there's a great amount of anxiety and fear in our families about sending kids to school and under these conditions. The critical practice 2 is more around the adults in the school or district community, and how do we connect and heal and build our capacity to support students. Critical practice 3 is focused on the student social emotional development in this time of virtual, hybrid, and in some cases, hopefully soon will be in-class learning. And finally, this question of how do we know that we're on the right track, and who makes decisions and has the power to make shifts that will impact our ability to support students, family, and staff. So it's this, data is a funny word. I always think of it more as information. Who has the information to make decisions? And we're seeing that school in no other time that I've been involved with it is around this relationships with our families, our communities, our political representatives as well. So it's a big footprint that school is having at the moment. We're going to look at critical practice 1, and it's interesting the way this is phrased, which is take time. I'm just going to hold that space right there. Take time to cultivate and deepen relationships, build partnerships, and plan for SEL. And as we know, one of the most limited resources and treasured resources we have is time. So this really directs us to think about these partnerships and take the time. Karen Pittman reminds us, as we sit down and really try to figure out what is going to be a long haul of reopening slowly, we're going to need such a different approach to the traditional show up and sit in your seat. We need all partners at the table, and we need young people and families at the table telling us where they learn best and how they would like to learn. So this is really at the heart of critical practice 1, are these partnerships. Oops, there we go. So the 4 activities that are in the roadmap and that are supported in the roadmap is, the first one is fostering new relationships that elevate student and family voice, student depending on the age. Then we also know that communication, if you haven't experienced it already, communication breakdowns are super common and very problematic. So how do we develop and support two-way communication with our partners and our families? Then how do we know that our efforts to focus on social emotional learning is supporting our students and families in particularly decision making? And this broad coalition and integrating SEL into plans, so it's not just, again, something that's done in a morning meeting in a classroom. So thinking about your own situation right now, your own context, which one of these activities is really emerging as a priority for you right now? Is it activity one, foster new relationships, student and family voice, two-way communication, the impact of SEL, and that broad coalition? If you were to rank that in a poll, which one would you rank as being your most immediate priority? And Melissa's going to give us an opportunity to actually do that ranking.
All right, so if you don't mind giving me screen sharing ability again,
Oh,
Mary.
sure. Let me stop screen share, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I need to do.
Perfect. So again, if you go to menti.com, the new code is 7506484. If someone else who has access to the document wants to paste the link, let us know which of those four is your priority, immediate priority, because I'm sure they're all priorities.
Melissa, can you post the link in chat?
I can't if I'm screen sharing, but it is in our run of show, so one of our other co-hosts could do that.
Robert, could you post it? Oh, thank you. You're on it.
Thank you. And this is another update. We will be ready for working in teams during our next sessions.
Oh, great. Thank you. So as the poll is coming in, it's interesting to note that we're really, all four of those areas are represented, with the fostering the new relationships as being the most frequently named, but there isn't one that's missing. It's all of them are important depending on the context that you're in. So we're going to then have a time to think about, for you, which one of those is your priority. And then we're going to have an opportunity to look at what are the resources that are in the roadmap that will support you in that priority area. So you're going to have a few minutes to open up the roadmap, find your priority area in pages 9 through 18 and just take a few minutes to look and see what are the resources that are there. And there's a bit.ly link for SEL for Reopening that will take you right in to the roadmap. And we'll take about 5-6 minutes to look on your own. What are the resources that are there for you? Any questions about this part? Anything coming up?
No questions that I can see, Mary.
Okay, so this means this is telling me that you are able to open up the roadmap, go to pages 9 through 18, and locate your priority action for critical practice 1, and look at the resources that are there. What are the essential questions? What's involved in preparing, implementing, or sustaining? And then what tools are present? And we'll come back at the top of the hour. And if you would like to turn your camera off while you do this, please take a moment for yourself as you look through the roadmap. And hopefully you've had a chance just to scan through and see how the roadmap is organized and how it might guide your own work. There's, in each of the action areas, there are essential questions. And I wanted to call our attention to one of them, which was, what are the existing channels and new feedback loops we will put into place to listen to our school community, take what we hear and use the information to inform our actions? So there's often modes of communication that are already present that we're not really utilizing, but we don't yet have feedback loops for it to come back to actually impact our actions so our community, our families and students can see how things have changed. We're going to now have an opportunity to break into our teams. I'm looking at Robert, yes. For a short discussion on, really you're in charge of this discussion, either something that came up as you scanned through the roadmap, or perhaps really looking at this essential question, what already communication exists and what new feedback loops might be helpful. And we'll take about 5 minutes in our teams, again, to think about that essential question or just share what came up in the scan of the roadmap. And we'll be back at 6 minutes after the hour. Great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to invite folks now. What questions came up for you as you were looking at the roadmap or in your team discussion? I'd say questions or insights, what you want to pursue. And we're going to use our Google Doc, which is in chat. Is that right, Melissa?
Mm-hmm.
And if you could open up the Google Doc with questions that you have, areas that you want to pursue around critical practice 1.
And thanks for people going in and changing the names. We had them set up as room numbers, but again, because we had to redo it, we also have to redo the room numbers to team names. So if your team name's not up there, go ahead and claim a room.
And if anyone wanted to speak out in the main room about something that came up, invite you to share a comment again or a question before we're going to head into a break. Okay. We're going to take a, whoops, we can inhale and exhale, but we're going to take a 5-minute stretch. So encourage you to turn off your camera, go to mute, step away from the computer, stretch, walk around a little bit, and we will be back at 1/4 after. So it's a little bit less than 5 minutes. Okay, see you at 10:15.
I hope you had a good stretch. So before we jump back into the remainder of the workshop, we wanted to just take another brief pause. So there's a researcher named Jennifer Eberhardt out of Stanford who has done a lot of work on implicit bias. And she talks about how pausing is a really important equity practice. And I think many of us have thought about the fact that when we're moving really fast, which we often are, we tend to revert back to our biases. It's a very easy thing to do. But when we give ourselves space to be more self-aware, we can really recenter ourselves on equity and how we are interacting with others and how we're in relationship with others. So I would just invite you to take a few deep breaths before we move on to our next section. And I will turn it back to Mary.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really love that. Smell the roses and blow out the candles. So we do need to pause. And we're going to move into critical practice 2 in the roadmap. And I think this is more of the traditional view of adult social emotional learning. And the quote is from superintendent up here in Oakland, Kyla Johnson Trammell. In this moment of great uncertainty, it is imperative that we model grace and compassion and how we are all struggling and adjusting to this new reality. That's going to be imperative not just for the next month, but for the next year, given what we are all going through. And one of the reasons we chose Kyla's quote is because it really addresses this year, as opposed to thinking about reopening. We typically think of it as the first 6 weeks of school, but this is really a year-long redesign process and continually going back and adjusting, readjusting. And given our context, it can mean moving from virtual to hybrid to in-person instruction, or staying virtual the whole year. We don't know, this place of not knowing. So critical practice 2 is about designing opportunities. And I really love that piece around the critical practice. It's we often want to change what the urgency of what our students are experiencing, the urgency of our families, and we often go to a default of wanting just to tell people what to do. And come on, let's get on it, let's just do it. We don't have time. And so critical practice 2 is reminding us that this is about designing opportunities depending on where the adults are, where they can connect, heal, and then build their capacity to support students. Because without that time to connect and heal and capacity, there is very little chance that they're going to be able to support their students, because they're juggling just way too much. There needs to be respite for the adults who are working with our families. So critical practice 2 takes us into that work around how do we design those kinds of opportunities. And very much as we did in the first one, is thinking about your own context and what would be your immediate priority. Is it around space and connection on staff for self-care, building trust? So prioritizing that space and connectivity. Is it around accessing mental health and trauma support? Is it, again, identifying opportunities for innovation and anti-racist practices? And then finally, is it around embedded professional learning? So it's not just professional learning quarterly or at the beginning of school and then maybe in January, but how do we embed it into the ongoing experience of our staff? So if you were to rank these and say, which one is the most immediate at the top of your mind for your context right now, we're going to invite you to go into the poll and rank those for us. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. Is this right, Melissa? You're gonna, and Melissa's gonna take over with that. So in looking at the poll as it's coming in, and again, acknowledging that every single one of these action areas is a priority in some district and in some school, and thinking about then how do you engage in conversation with your team about addressing this, allowing space for connection. What does that look like? And the resources that are in the roadmap to help you do that. So we're going to have now the same opportunity to go, oops, this is all changing very fast for me. And going into, sorry, Zoom screen share. Which priority then, and looking at the resources that are in the roadmap based on your priority area. So these are pages 19 through 28. And each priority area has a rationale, some essential questions to consider. Think about preparing for this work. How do you implement this work? How do you sustain it? And then what are the tools and resources that are available? And we individually will look at that, say till the bottom of the hour. So at 10:30, we'll come back and again, offer you the opportunity to mute and turn off your camera while you go into the roadmap and look at that priority action area that is your most immediate concern. And when we come back, then you'll have an opportunity to go into a smaller team and share what you discovered and also take a look at the essential question. Are there any questions about what we're going to be doing for the next 5 minutes or so, 5 or 6 minutes? Okay, we'll see you back at the bottom of the hour. So coming back, this invitation is to go into your team discussion and think about either what you discovered in the roadmap around opportunities where adults can connect, heal, and build, or answer the question or toss it around is how can we maximize the supportive connections between all adults in the school community that are already there in ways that may look different from previous years. So Robert, if you could give folks time to go into their teams, and we will come back in, say 6 minutes.
All righty, so opening these up and go ahead and unmute yourselves as you join your breakout room.
Things in your team discussions around designing opportunities where adults can connect, heal, and build capacity. I'm going to ask Jennifer if she's noticing anything in chat that could share, or if folks again can speak out, that's fine.
Nothing in chat quite yet.
Okay. And that's fine. This would be more for questions that you're wondering about, or
There's one that just popped up, citing frequent check-ins.
Mm.
Designated professional learning time that allows for teachers to work together and empty their cups. Have peer partners who check in with one another, wellness Wednesdays, group activities such as yoga.
I just joined a book club at Castle, and we're reading dystopian novels. My goodness, it's not a lot of SEL technical work, but it certainly is connecting us. And it's an opportunity to connect and also heal, doing some, we were having a discussion in the main room about what about normal do you want to keep, and what about normal do you want to let go? So making decisions about that, of what can you let go of and what's really important to keep. So thank you so much. Again, this is just a little intro to the roadmap, and we'll have another opportunity on our next session, day 3, to go in a lot more deeply into it. And Jennifer.
Okay, so we're going to take another screen break. We did our last one roughly 20 minutes ago. So we're just going to invite you once again to look about 20 feet away from your computer for about 20 seconds before we move forward. Okay. So while we're transitioning slides, I just had to mention one comment I saw come up in the chat that I really loved, that suggested instead of making to-do lists, make to-be lists. I thought that was really, really neat. So we're going to just quickly review some of what we've explored together today. We went over the framework for adult social emotional learning. We engaged with some adult SEL practices in those categories of learn, collaborate, and model. And we dove into 2 sections of the Castle Roadmap on partnerships and caring for staff. So now we're going to do a little reflection on our own. We'll stay in the main room for about 2 minutes, and you can jot this down on paper or in the Google Doc if you like, but this is really more of a personal reflection about what from today's session feels important for you to consider, to learn about, or try out when you get back. Does your intention on adult SEL that you thought about before still make sense to you? So if you could think about this question, and you can turn off your video if you like, and we'll bring you back in about 2 minutes. Okay. Want to move to the next slide, Mary? Thank you. So to apply this to your context in your own schools and districts and organizations, we're going to ask you to do a shared reflection now. And if Melissa, you could pop that Google Doc back in the chat, thank you. If you could go into that Google Doc again and think for a moment and write a few sentences on what is a key way you're going to ensure regular time and space for adults to reflect, heal, connect with each other, and take care of their needs. If you have more than one thing you want to jot down, that's great. But if you could write at least one way you're going to ensure the regular time and space for adults. We're going to have about 3 minutes for this. So we'll stay in the main room together. Once again, you can leave your video on or off. So if you go into that Google Doc, and a reminder, the Google Doc is a shared document, and we'll be looking at what one another are jotting down for ideas. So we'll bring you back in about 3 minutes. About 1 more minute. I see a couple of notes that some folks are having trouble typing in the Google Doc because there's heavy traffic message and it's very slow. So you can jot those things down somewhere else and maybe go back into the Google Doc when it's less busy. Sorry about that.
Or I think another option would be go ahead and put it in chat,
Yeah.
and we could add it, because the chat will also be available afterwards as well. So go ahead and use chat. This really goes back to that intention setting, because what we know about adult learning is we need time to set an intention, but also writing it down really increases the likelihood that we'll follow up on it, and then sharing it and having it seen by others also helps us with our own internal accountability system when we're putting it out into the world. Part of what we've attempted to do in these 2 days and coming up again on our final day together is that we're providing the opportunities and experiences for you, things like even something as simple as the 20-20-20 screen break of experiencing care in the normal everyday Zoom world that many of us live in, the kind of pacing that we do where you have time to do thinking alone before you go into a shared space to talk about and create shared knowledge together in terms of adult SEL. And then our practice of modeling publicly engaging in our adult SEL with one another. So this is the intent of this was these 3 days is to provide you with information, but also strategies for actually weaving social emotional learning and service of equity into the, as I say, sort of the nitty gritty of your work. When we get together again, it's going to be, again, a lot more opening up the roadmap, choosing that priority area, and actually doing work together. So it will be at the let's make it real level, and then getting feedback. So much of what we do in terms of communication, we put things out there, but we rarely get an opportunity to get feedback from colleagues about our planning, about our language that we're using, our intentionality. So when we gather again on the 21st, kind of push up our sleeves and dig in more closely and get feedback. So we're not just in the Zoom world where we're trying things out. And speaking of feedback, we, as you can notice, we actually adjust, adapt, change the experience that you're having based on the feedback that we get from you. So there is a link in chat for you to give us your feedback on the experience that you're having today. And we'll take shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 minutes to complete that feedback form, and then we'll come back for our closing. And again, if there's a challenge accessing it, if you could chat it in, that would be helpful. Hopefully you're finishing up the feedback. And please don't do what I did, which was I completed it and then forgot to hit submit. So it would be terrific to hit that submit button so that we can, again, make some adjustments to our next session based on that. We're actually closing up with kind of a different way to end. So much of when we are attending conferences or gatherings, the enjoyment and a lot of the learning happens, I call it, you're hanging out in the back of the room, you hear someone say something, you want to follow up with them, you realize there's someone here that you haven't connected with, you'd like to, you've heard about what they're doing, or you have a question for anyone on the team, Gail, Melissa, Jennifer's going to have to step away, or myself, or Robert, and we're here for your questions and also giving you an opportunity if you would like to huddle with your teammates in a breakout room or connect with new colleagues, send them an invite in chat to hang out literally in the back of the room or in a breakout session. So it's a gift of time and an optimism about being connected to one another, and to come back again on Friday. Push up your sleeves because we're going to be ready to dig into the roadmap and use the tools that are available to us for both critical practice 1 and 2.